In the wake of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, thousands of Russians are fleeing their country. Many are seeking entry into the United States, leaving embassies around the world scrambling. Nahal Toosi is a senior foreign affairs correspondent for Politico. Nahal, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So who is fleeing Russia now? What types of people are we seeing trying to get into the U.S.?
Well, it's getting harder to flee Russia, but we're talking about people from political dissidents to LGBTQ activists to journalists to scientists and technology workers who feel like due to the sanctions, there's just not really a future for them in Russia. So it's a wide array of people basically fleeing Putin's rule as well as economic failures in the long run.
So what are the current estimates as to the number of Russians who have fled their country since the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, we believe there's several 100,000. It's hard to know exactly how many. I mean, there was one figure the other day of 3.8 million Russians leaving, but that apparently included, normal travel. So it was hard to say how many people were leaving for sure, but the numbers were higher than normal. And so it's definitely at least several 100,000.
So what's been the administration's response? You obtained a cable from the State Department talking about this. What did it say?
Yeah, so basically, Russians are showing up at U.S. embassies all over the world trying to get visas to the United States, saying, they want to come as tourists or whatever. And there's certainly a sense that many of them intend to stay once they get here, seeking asylum and that sort of thing. The administration, the Biden administration, really hasn't quite figured out exactly how to deal with this. This cable was sent to the embassies so that consular officials who give out visas and things can know a little bit about how to deal with Russians, since many of them don't normally deal with Russians. The administration is trying to reduce some visa requirements for Russian scientists. That's a way they can kind of accelerate brain drain, get some of the best people from Russia and hurt Vladimir Putin. At the same time, they're looking at ways to expand the U.S. refugee program so that Russians can access it better, but they still aren't giving any details on that.
As you said, there is a White House proposal to facilitate Russian scientists and engineers in certain fields to come into the country. Can you give us a little bit more detail on that and where that proposal stands right now?
That's right. So the White House is asking Congress to pass this into law. And basically what it does is it reduces some of the visa requirements for certain Russians who are in fields like artificial intelligence, engineering. I think chemistry is probably one of them. Nuclear is probably one of them. And one of the things that they, for instance, would want to remove is a requirement that an employer sponsor you. That's a big requirement. So it's the type of thing that whatever ends up going into law, it's about making it easier for those people to find a way to the United States.
And what has been the reaction from Congress? Do they seem likely to pass that?
That's a really tricky one. There's a sense in Congress that you definitely want to help Ukrainians, but it's not quite clear how much they're willing to go to help Russians. And to be honest, a lot of the Russians who are leaving, some of it's for economic reasons. Others are genuinely fleeing what they feel is political persecution. And a lot of them will tell you that, they feel like Ukrainians should definitely be ahead of them in line.
You report that thousands of Russians and Ukrainians have arrived at the U.S.-Mexico border asking for asylum. How did they get there, and are they treated any differently from others that arrive at that same border?
Yeah, so a lot of Russians are able to get to Latin American countries because some of those countries don't necessarily require a visa. So you can just go there and then you can travel up until you reach the border between the U.S. and Mexico. Now, a lot of Ukrainians are getting there the same way. Because the U.S. is using Title 42 rules to deny a lot of applicants or people trying to cross the border for asylum, they're denying them under these Title 42 health rules that are put in place because of the coronavirus. Many of these Russians are not being allowed to cross the border, but the U.S. is allowed to make exceptions on a case-by-case basis, and it seems like it is making those exceptions for Ukrainians. And that's been it's a tricky situation because, both groups feel like they are fleeing Vladimir Putin to a certain extent.
Explain how the refugee resettlement program works. How long does it take? Because I understand there are Afghans that are still being processed.
Yeah, so the refugee resettlement program can take years and years for someone to go through. Typically, what happens is someone goes to another country from their own country and they go to the United Nations, they apply to be a refugee, the UN has to accept them, and then they might get placed in a long line of people who are eligible for resettlement in the United States as a refugee. And that, again, adds years and years and years as well. So typically, it's very difficult to get to the US through the refugee program. And under the Trump years, it became even harder because the Trump administration dramatically reduced the number of refugees it was willing to admit and cut back on staff and very much under-resourced the program that was, helping these refugees get resettled. The Biden administration is trying to rebuild that program, but it's a long way going. I mean, they're nowhere near it. And the Afghans who were brought to the United States, last year, they actually came under a different program, humanitarian parole, and that's a temporary program. But a lot of the same people who help refugees are helping the Afghans, so they're stretched thin that way as well.
Nahal, I wonder if there are any security concerns that the U.S. could unknowingly bring in spies or bad actors.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the concerns that some Republicans have had when it comes to Russians. There was a letter that about 20 Republican lawmakers sent to the Department of Homeland Security in April, saying that they were hearing that a lot of Russians are being allowed to cross the border, and there might be security concerns with some of these folks. And that's certainly a possibility every single time in any of these cases. Now, when it comes to the refugee program and asylum and things like that, the US says it has very strong vetting procedures to ensure that a lot of these people are not security threats. And in the case of Ukrainians, most of them are women and children. But it's very hard to tell. And ultimately, yeah, it's absolutely a risk.
All right. Well, Nahal, we appreciate your reporting on this. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.